Hi, my name is Angel. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to my March wrap-up. I read 15 books in the month of March, and as always with my wrap-ups, I go through what I read on my channel first, and then we go through everything else in order of rating from lowest to highest. Before we get into that though, I just want to quickly look at my reading stats for the month. This is something that I'm trying to start doing this year, is to go over my stats for each individual month in the wrap-up video. I forgot to do it for February, but we're doing it for March, and I also kind of want to create this little graphic sort of thing with different graphs on it. So here are my March stats. Like I said, I read 15 books in March, which came out to 3,140 pages read, and I listened to 31 hours and 19 minutes of audiobook. So if you are new here and you've never heard me talk about this before, I adjust all of these stats to be as accurate as I can. So for example, if I listen to a book fully on audio, I do not count the pages of that physical book towards my page count. And then the hours that I record listening to audiobook are adjusted to the actual speed that I listen to. So like I said, it can be as accurate as possible. As far as genres, I had one fantasy book and one thriller book. I had two books that were kind of just general fiction, as well as two nonfiction books. Then I had 3 sci-fi books and 6 horror books. To look at the ratings real quick, I had one book that was 2 stars and one book that was 2.5 stars. And then I had 2 books that were 3 stars, 2 books that were 3.5 stars, and 2 books that were 4 stars. And then I had 4 5-star books, and there are 3 books that are not included in this chart because I did not rate them. And I won't be talking about them in this video anyways. We'll get to that in just a second. And then to look at how I actually consumed these books. 2 of the books I read physically only. 4 of the books I read via audio only. Then I read 3 different ebooks, and 6 of the books I read with a mix. So in this case, it was, I think, physical and audio, but that could also be physical and ebook, just a mix of any of the different methods. So those are the stats out of the way. To go over what I have already talked to you guys about on my channel, I only uploaded one reading vlog in the month of March. It was just a weird month and I just didn't feel like filming and I didn't feel like reading, and so only one of the vlogs that I had planned got up. So to quickly go over the books that I read in there, I read 2 nonfiction books that I meant to read for Black History Month, but then I didn't get around to reading them and they got pushed back to the next month. The first one is Madness, Race and Insanity in a Jim Crow Asylum by Antonia Hilton. This is a history of Crownsville State Hospital, which is a psychiatric hospital, and the book kind of goes over how it started and how it ended and everything in between, and how this hospital operated during times of segregation in the US. It also is kind of a personal history of the author and her family's journey with mental health as well. I think this was very, very informative, very like well put together and very well researched, and I would highly recommend it. I give it 5 stars. And then the other nonfiction book that I read for that video was Why Does Everything Have to Be About Race by Keith Boykin. This is like 25 different essays that tackle common arguments that people have when it comes to racism, and it talks a lot about systemic racism. This one I gave 5 stars as well, and I would highly recommend, especially if you are somebody who lives in the US and you want to see an actual account of how systemic racism really affects people in the country. And for that reading vlog, I didn't even say what reading vlog it was. I was checking off reading goals. I read 2 fiction books. The first was Little Eyes by Samantha Schweblin, which is kind of like sci-fi-ish, but not really. This is about people that choose to get these like little devices in their home that are operated remotely by other random people around the world. You don't know who your device is paired to, and there's just somebody in the house watching you through a camera on this thing. This I thought was interesting, but it felt more of like an introduction to this concept, or sort of a mild exploration. It didn't really feel like a traditional novel. You don't really get connected to the characters, or at least I didn't, and I thought it was interesting, but I wish that there was a little bit more to it. So this one I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. And then next in that reading vlog, I read The Memory of Animals by Claire Fuller, which I gave 2.5 stars. This is like a dystopian. There's a pandemic happening, there is an experimental drug trial happening, and there is this like sort of sci-fi-ish technology that allows people to revisit and relive their past memories. I just think this book had too much going on in it, and it could have been really, really great if the author chose to kind of narrow it down and really dive deep into some of the concepts that were presented here, rather than having so many different things happening at once. My favorite element of the book was this like technology that allows people to relive their memories, but I feel like we didn't really go deeply into that. Nothing really happened for the whole story, and it just wasn't to my taste. So those are the 4 books that I've already talked about on my channel, so we are going to quickly move on from those. Like I mentioned, we are going to go through everything else that I read, starting with the lowest rated all the way up to my highest rated books of March. So my lowest rated book is probably my most anticipated book for the year, and I am deeply, deeply saddened by this. This Book Will Bury Me by Ashley Winstead, which is sort of like a crime thriller. The battery is going to die on me. But this is about a woman who has lost her father. She is dealing with a lot of grief, and she kind of finds these true crime forums online and gets into this community of people that is really like they're internet sleuths, and they're really into trying to solve crime and like working with the local police to find tips and find clues and pass those on and get these crimes solved. And she starts on a smaller case with them, and they make really, really good progress, and she feels very accomplished once that murder case is solved, and so they move on to a higher profile case. The big problem that I have with this book is that it is pretty much entirely inspired by the Idaho 4, the Idaho College killings, King Road killings, however you might have heard of the case. This was a really, really big case that blew up and got a lot of media attention, and is still an ongoing case. The suspect has not been charged or gone to trial or anything yet. This is about 4 college kids that were brutally murdered one night, and Ashley Winstead in this book has a true crime case that is extremely, extremely similar to the real Kings Road Idaho 4 killings. There are like exact details that are pretty much the same in real life and in the story, and then the things that were changed were just changed like very, very slightly, and there's something about that just rubs me the wrong way. Like that is not something that I can really support when it comes to reading. And as much as I love Ashley Winstead and I've loved her thrillers before and was really, really looking forward to this one, I have to be unbiased and I have to think about it from an objective point of view. And I had the same problem with Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll, where that was based off of a real true crime case and real murders, yet the author was changing little details, and I just can't really get behind that. Especially with the case that Ashley Winstead chose to be inspired by for this book. That is still an ongoing case. Like I said, the suspect has not gone to trial, has not been charged yet or anything. It is very much an open case, and I just can't get behind it. I try to put myself in the mindset of like the victims' families, and like if that was my family member that was killed so brutally and horrifically in this way, and an author comes along to make an entertaining thriller out of that case and uses a lot of the same details from the real case, that just I don't think I would be okay with that if that was my family member that was a victim. So if you want to know like the breakdown, like the details that are the same in the real life case and that Ashley Winstead brought into this book, you can check out my Goodreads review on this, or many other Goodreads reviewers are pointing out the same thing. Aside from the like ethics of that, I don't think it was a really good thriller either. It was very, very slow and it wasn't super compelling. Like I didn't truly care about what was going on. Ashley Winstead, I've said this before, like when I read her books, they are typically books that I'm like hooked into and I like can't put down. I'm like, I need to know what's gonna happen. They just have this quality that just makes me super, super invested. But that, I did not feel that same way with this one, even before like we got into everything else that I just talked about. So this was definitely my biggest disappointment for this month, probably for the year so far, just because I had such high hopes before going into it. Moving into 3-star territory, my first 3-star was Wake Up and Open Your Eyes by Clay McLeod Chapman. Clay McLeod Chapman used to be somebody that I almost considered as like a favorite author of mine. The first 2 books that I read by him, Ghost Eaters and Whisper Down the Lane. Oh my god, it took me a second. One of those was 4.5 stars, one of those was 5 stars, and then it's just kind of gone down from there. The next book that he published, I gave 3.5 stars. I read a backlist book that I hated, and this one was just okay. I thought this was going to be like the perfect sort of horror for me. Of course, I love horror with commentary in it, and this one is kind of like an apocalyptic book that is caused by people being like possessed by media brainwashing. So we have like the typical people that watch Facts News and are sort of brainwashed by that. I'm sure you can kind of figure out what that's poking fun at. We also have like people that fall into wellness scams online. And then it also made its way into the children's brain via a certain type of video, Baby Ghost, which is pretty much Baby Shark. Which, first of all, listening to this on audio was so annoying when it was like Baby Ghost, do 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 do. I was like, can we just like skip ahead? Like, please, I don't want to listen to you sing this freaking song. I wasn't really a big fan of this one because it definitely felt like the commentary, like I said, I love horror with commentary and I knew this was going to have that, but it really was banging you over the head with it. And it's like, okay, yes, we get it. You could have been a little bit more subtle. And I think this book also could have been a little bit shorter. I feel like it went on way longer than it needed to. I didn't really ever feel connected to the main character that we're following primarily throughout the book. I didn't feel super connected to the story itself. Like, I didn't really care what happened to the main character, and usually if you're following like an apocalyptic story, you want to be following a character that you're rooting for and you want them to come out okay in the end. But this one, I was like, I don't care what happens to this guy, like I don't give a fuck. It also started to get really repetitive with the writing towards the end, and it just didn't stand out to me in my mind. Even thinking about it now, I'm like, I really don't have anything to say about it. It was just not as good as I thought it was gonna be. The next 3-star that I read was called Beasts. I'm not going to try to pronounce this author's name. This is a Norwegian author and this book was translated from Norwegian. I got the ARC through NetGalley because it was available as like a read now title, which means you don't have to get approved for it. You can just say, yeah, I want to read this, and then you get access to the title. And I guess I didn't realize at the time because I read the description and I thought it sounded really interesting, but this is a YA, like teen YA book, and I didn't realize that until I started it. But it is a novella, so it went by very, very quickly. We are following this young boy and his younger sister in this kind of apocalyptic situation where there are these beasts, these giant creatures, these big monsters that have just kind of shown up one day. They attacked all of the major cities first and then slowly started to make their way out into the rural areas. So the village that these people lived in was probably one of the last to see these creatures. They lose their mother and we are just following we are reading from the perspective of the older brother, but we are following him and his sister and him in his responsibility to take care of his younger sister and grow up a little quicker than he should. I thought this was really interesting. It was definitely very, very creepy. I really love the like creature in the woods sort of horror, and I really like the description of the creatures in here. It sounded very freaky. Would definitely scare me like if I was a young kid reading this book, especially if I was reading it at night. It was definitely a little bit spooky. I enjoyed it for the most part, but I felt very let down by the ending, and I knew it was gonna let me down after I got to a certain point, and I was like, okay, there's not much left in this book because it is a novella and we are still in a very dire situation. We haven't made a lot of progress with these children getting to a safe spot. So I don't know how the book's gonna end, and I did not enjoy how it ended. I know a lot of times like apocalyptic fiction does have an open end because you never really know like where the characters are gonna end up years down the line, but this one just like, I don't know. It gives you nothing. It was alright. It was a quick read. I didn't think it was that bad. I think it would be a good book for this target audience, the age group that it's targeted to, especially if these are younger teens trying to get into horror and maybe wanting to dabble a little bit. These next two books I'm going to talk about together because they are both novellas and they are part of a series. This is All Systems Red and Artificial Condition by Martha Wells, which is the first and second book in the Murderbot Diaries. These are little sci-fi novellas where you are reading from the perspective of a robot that refers to himself as a Murderbot. They are kind of funny. There's a lot of action going on, and we are just following this robot who is built for a certain purpose and doesn't really want to be alive for that specific purpose, and it's kind of just a robot on the search for meaning. I know this is a really well-loved series that I've kind of like had my eye on for some years, and I finally got around to reading them. The first book, All Systems Red, I gave 4 stars, and the second one, Artificial Condition, I gave 3.5 stars. I will definitely continue to go on in the series, but I don't really have much to say about it to you guys right now. So to move on to my other 4-star book, I read Cursebound by Sarah L. Arifi. This is also a sequel to Feybound, which is a fantasy, little bit of romance in there, but I wouldn't call it a romantasy because I feel like it's more like fantasy focused. But Feybound, the first book, follows these 2 sisters that are elves. They get exiled out of the elven land and they end up stumbling among fae out in the forest, and for the longest time it was rumored that the fae no longer existed, that they kind of went extinct. So now we are following these 2 elves in the Fae land, and they are learning new things. So that was the first book. The second book kind of picks up right where that one left off. Obviously I can't get into the details of the plot too much as it is a sequel and I don't want to spoil anything, but I really love this. I love the world that has been created within this series. This is going to be a trilogy, so there's one more book yet to come out. I really enjoy the magic. I enjoy the characters. It's just a really fun to follow book, and I'm definitely excited for the third one. And let's get a drum roll going because now we are on to my 5-star books, which I already told you 2 of them were nonfiction, and then I have 2 other 5 stars to talk about. Up first is The Favorites by Elaine Fargo. I'm sure you've heard of it. Everybody is reading this right now. It's marketed as like a romance, or it's like tagged primarily as a romance on Goodreads, and I wouldn't really agree with that. It's definitely more just kind of general fiction. There is a little bit of romance going on. You are following a relationship. This is about a woman, and why can't I remember her name? I think her name is Kat, right? Like Katarina. Anyways, she is like a famous like ice dancer, a figure skater, and we are following her journey to get to that point. And then it's also about her relationship with her dance partner, who is somebody that she has known through childhood and gone through a lot of really traumatic things. They grew up poor, they grew up kind of in the middle of nowhere, and so they had to work really hard to be able to be recognized in figure skating and make it as far as they did. And they have a very tumultuous relationship. there is intense passion and romance, and then there is dramatic breakups and a lot of other things happening. And so we're following them throughout a pretty long span of their life and all of the back and forth between them. But this was just such an addictive book and so fascinating to follow. I really, really loved the characters. I really loved reading about all of the ice skating things going on, which is not something that I knew a lot about. But let me tell you, when I finished this book, I went on YouTube and I was like binging ice dance competition videos because I was like, this shit is really like insane. Like, I've always known like people that can do that shit, like that's crazy. And then like reading about it in the book and from like the perspective of, like, it's a fiction book, but it almost feels like a real book, like a real story, reading from the perspective of somebody that's actually working to do that and how difficult it really is, and then watching those videos again and being like, holy shit, that's insane. But this gets compared a lot to Daisy Jones and the Six because it kind of has a documentary style to it, where we are hearing from various people involved in their lives, and this is a documentary about their relationship and their time in the sport. So I thought it was really, really fascinating. I really love this one. Definitely believe the hype when it comes to it because I'm still thinking about it and will probably reread it at some point. And the last book that I have to talk to you guys about today is another 5-star, and that is The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones, which I did get as an ARC, but it is now out. It published March 25th. So if you have not picked it up yet, definitely do that. This book was so good. This is a hard one to explain because there's a few different things going on. So we are reading, the book opens up with a woman telling us that she has found a journal from her like great grandfather or something that was a priest, and in the journal he is recounting the stories of an indigenous man that has shown up to the church and started telling him these confessions. So it's already kind of a book within a book because we are reading the journal of this priest. This is in 1912, but then we are also reading his recounts of the stories that this native man is telling him. And this book is focused around the Marias massacre. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce it, but this was a massacre that occurred where about 200 native people, including children, elderly, were slaughtered by US troops. So this is a historical horror type of book, but it's also a vampire story. So this native man comes into his church and is like, let me share my confession with you. And the man goes by many names, but most commonly in the book, the name that is used for him is Good Stab. So he is recounting all of these different things that have happened in his life, and then once we come to learn that he is a vampire and he is telling us all of these horrific things that he has done as a vampire, the people that he's killed, the animals that he's killed in order to feed. So it's bloody, it's gory, like there's definitely a lot of horror there, but then also like the historical aspect of it brings in a really interesting element, and it also has a very heavy emotional impact as we learn more about this man and what exactly he is telling us and why he is telling this story to the priest. I don't really want to say too much about it because I think one of the best things about this book is following along the story and watching as it slowly unfolds until we get to the end. And even though I kind of knew like what was coming towards the end of the story, I was still like shocked to the last page by everything that went down. I was like, oh, okay, was not expecting that. The creature feature in here is definitely really fun. The historic element, like I said, is really, really fascinating, and it definitely taught me a lot of things that I didn't know about this massacre, this real life event that happened. As with any Stephen Graham Jones, of course, he has that signature writing style that does not work for everybody. He goes very, very detailed with everything that he describes. So if you don't like Stephen Graham Jones, I don't think you'll like this book. But if you've read from Stephen Graham Jones before and you think you can kind of get with it, then I would highly, highly recommend this book. This was definitely a top standout for me. So as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, if you guys remember, there were 3 other books that I read in March that I will not be giving a rating to and I will not be talking about in this video, and that is because this is for a reading vlog. Those 3 books that I read were part of a 5-book series, and I am vlogging the entire series. So I wanted to get that up in March. It didn't happen. I have 2 other books to read for that vlog, and then it will go up hopefully sometime in April, hopefully the beginning of April. You guys will see that. I'm not going to tell you what the books are. That's why I'm not going to be talking about it in this video. I want it to be a surprise because I'm kind of excited for it. Hopefully other people get excited for it too when it goes up, but the only thing I will tell you guys is that, like I said, it's a 5-book series and it's also an older series. So that's all the hints I'm giving you. So those 3 books won't be included in this wrap up, and the other 2 I probably won't include in my April wrap up either. I think I'll just put the vlog out and that will be the only time that you guys hear me really talk about those books on the channel. But let me tell you, it will probably be a very long vlog, so get prepared for another feature film, major motion picture coming your way. However, with all of that being said, those are the 15 books that I read in the month of March. Let me know if you guys have read any of these titles as well and what you thought of them. And with all of that being said, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you next time for Indie April.